Okay, what I'm going to share with you this morning is what I've learned about changing the fuel pump in a Mercury Grand Marquis, which is the same as a Crown Victoria and also the Lincoln Town Cars. Same body style they used for years. You might recognize it as the Panther platform, but they have the tank upright between the rear differential and the trunk. Okay, like I said, this has been used in a lot of different vehicles, both Ford and Mercury, same thing. Okay, and one of the problems with taking the tanks out of these things is I've done a few of them, and I ran across where the stud up here is always, when you go to put it back in, is always too short. Let me get this light out of the way. Okay, there's a gentleman on YouTube that has a video that explains why. Well, it seems from the factory, those studs are a lot longer. They're scored, once they run the nut down, they snap off the excess. And it makes, because for safety purposes, so in a collision, that stud doesn't puncture the tank, so they want it shorter. That's the reason. All right, and I've seen a couple different repairs that you can do. I've seen people cut this strap and actually lengthen it, which works. And also there's a gentleman that disconnected it here and put a U-bolt in here and essentially made the, changed the mounting point, making the strap longer. Okay, the problem I have with that is, although it will hold the tank in, the tank is not held as tightly as it was designed to, and that kind of bothers me. So if you have to take the tank out of these things, I recommend going to the dealer, and you can buy those studs and the captive nut and all that. So if you're going to take the tank out, go ahead and change it. Use the proper stud, run the nut down, snap the stud off, and you're good. The tank is in there held as tightly as it was designed to. I think that's important. Okay, but on to the fuel pump. All right, the only reason you have to take the tank out of these things to change the fuel pump or do anything work with the fuel gauge or anything like that is this wire, this set of wires right here. There's a plug-in on top of the tank that you cannot get to without taking this tank out. It goes around the end of it and up on top. There's another gentleman I saw, his solution was, what he did is he just cut these wires, took the fuel pump out, did his repair, put the fuel pump back in, and put solderless connectors on, which works absolutely fine. But if you have to take it out again, then you end up cutting it again, more solderless connectors, and you end up with what I call a clusterfuck. And you probably already figured out what I did. I cut the wires, and one thing I figured out is, he cut them up here is what it looked like from the video. And it would make it really hard to reach. And I figured out that these three wires do not go into the fuel pump itself. They go up and they go into the plug-in that's up here above the frame. Okay, so what I did is I gave myself a little extra slack, and this is a Delphi plug-in. It's an automotive type. I got it off of Amazon. I obviously got the 3 connector one. They make them 1, 2, 3, whatever you want, whatever you need. But I just, cut that, spliced, put that connector in, and basically what I did is I relocated the plug-in from on top of the tank to right here. If this pump takes a shit again, or if I have a problem with the fuel gauge or anything like that, and I have to take this out, all I have to do is unplug it, plug it back in. So I got a plug-in here. I got this plug-in that goes up here, and just made the job so much easier. And also, as you see, I have the exhaust out of the way. The gentleman who, in the video, he cuts it up here and uses solderless connectors. He just wrapped a strap around this and strapped it to the wheel and used a ratchet and pulled the exhaust over, because it is rubber mounted, which will work just fine. But I just bought this car, and it's a 2001 Grand Marquis, and it's got the original hangers on it. One of them was already broke, the other 2 were just about to break, so I cut them off, disconnected it at the converters, and just moved it out of my way completely, which made the job so much easier. Since I had to take the exhaust mounts off anyhow, I just thought, 4 bolts, no big deal. I had to put a couple new gaskets in it, no big deal. But with that exhaust out of the way and just cutting those 3 wires, because you can get your hand up in here and unplug this connector right here, and obviously you need the proper disconnects for the fuel line. I've got a whole set of them here. That takes the first 2. The smallest one goes to this one, the next up one goes to that one. But you have to have the proper tools to remove this, but you can get those at any auto parts store. So once I got the exhaust out of the way, cut those 3 wires, unplugged it up there, disconnected the fuel lines, that pump comes right out, no problem. You know, no problem getting the float for the fuel gauge out, plenty of room. And then going back in was a piece of cake, especially having the exhaust out of the way. But I highly recommend doing something to this effect. You don't have to go to the fancy automotive plug-ins, whatever works for you, but that just makes it so I don't have to cut it again. Just unplug it, plug it back in, and I'm done. And as far as, you know, if you have to pull the tank out, you know, I highly recommend getting the proper studs from the dealer, change it out. Don't be cutting those straps. Don't be relocating the mounts. To be, you know, the tank was designed to be there with a certain amount of tension on it to hold it in place, to keep it safe. And, you know, you don't need to be re-engineering the car to that effect. This is, you know, technically re-engineering it, but it has nothing to do with any kind of structural thing, nothing to do with the mounts. It doesn't make the car any less safe, you know. So that's just my opinion for what it's worth. But if you're working on, you know, a Grand Marquis, Crown Vic, Lincoln Town car, when you have fuel pump problems, I think, you know, cutting that is the way to go instead of taking the whole tank out. And I said, just for simplicity's sake, you know, I put the plug in on it. Yes, you can use solderless connectors, but like I said, if you ever have to take it apart again, you know, it'll be a pain in the ass. So for what it's worth, I hope this helps.